I just wanted one night of freedom with another guy, but my husband got mad over it and did this. Hey Reddit, it feels strange to be sharing my story here, but I guess everyone needs an outlet. My name is Morgan, and up until recently I thought I had it all figured out. I was happily married to William for 3 years, and we were living the dream we had built since high school. If someone had told me a few months ago that this would be my life now, I'd have honestly thought that person was lying or joking, lol. But now my nightmare has become my reality. William and I were high school sweethearts. We met in our junior year, a time when everything seemed possible and love felt like the answer to every question. He was the shy, smart guy in class, and I was the outgoing social butterfly. Somehow we clicked, and before we knew it, we were inseparable. I still remember our first date like it was yesterday. It was a warm spring afternoon, and William had mustered up the courage to ask me out. He was so nervous, stumbling over his words as he invited me to a local diner for milkshakes. I said yes without hesitation, my heart fluttering with excitement. That first date was magical. We sat in a cozy corner booth, sipping on our milkshakes and talking for hours. William was a great listener, and he made me laugh like no one else could. We talked about everything and nothing, sharing our hopes, our dreams, and our fears. As the sun began to set, we reluctantly left the diner, neither of us wanting the night to end. We walked hand in hand through the park, the world around us fading into the background as we lost ourselves in each other's company. It was then, under the starlit sky, that I knew I had found someone special. William and I were eager to spend more time together. We had quickly become each other's best friend and confidant, and our second date was just as memorable as the first. A few days after our first date, William surprised me by showing up at my doorstep with a picnic basket in hand. He had planned a romantic picnic in the park, complete with sandwiches, fruit, and my favorite chocolate chip cookies. It was such a thoughtful gesture, and I couldn't help but smile as we walked to the park hand in hand. We found a secluded spot under a large oak tree and spread out a blanket. The weather was perfect, with the sun shining brightly overhead and a gentle breeze rustling the leaves. We talked and laughed, sharing stories about our childhoods, our dreams for the future, and everything in between. As we sat there enjoying each other's company, I felt a sense of peace and contentment wash over me. It was at that moment that I knew William was someone special, someone I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. After we finished our picnic, we took a stroll through the park, exploring the winding paths and enjoying the beauty of nature. We came across a pond with a small dock, and William suggested we sit and watch the sunset. It was a perfect end to a perfect day, and as we sat there, watching the sky turn shades of orange and pink, I felt grateful to have William by my side. Our second date solidified our bond, and from that day on, we were inseparable. By our third date, I was really starting to fall for William. We had been friends for a while, and I always felt a spark between us, but I never imagined it would turn into something more. As we sat in the cozy little cafe sipping our coffees, William looked at me with those kind eyes of his and asked me to be his girlfriend. I was taken aback, but in the best way possible. I could see the sincerity in his eyes, and I knew that I wanted to be with him too. I said yes, of course, and we spent the rest of the day walking around the city, hand in hand, feeling like we were on top of the world. From that moment on, everything felt different. I felt different. It was like all the pieces of my life were finally falling into place. On our fourth date, William and I decided to try something new and exciting. We both loved the outdoors, so we chose to go on a hike in a nearby national park. The weather was perfect, with the sun shining and a gentle breeze blowing through the trees. As we walked, we chatted about everything under the sun, from our favorite childhood memories to our hopes and dreams for the future. At one point, we stumbled upon a beautiful clearing with a stunning view of the valley below. We sat on a big rock, and William pulled out a simple picnic he had prepared. It was nothing fancy, just sandwiches, fruit, and a bottle of wine. We laughed and talked for hours, enjoying each other's company and the peacefulness of our surroundings. As the sun started to set, we reluctantly headed back to the car, feeling happy and content. It was a day I'll always remember, a day that made me realize how much I cared for William and how special our connection was. Being with William was so easy. He was caring, attentive, and always made me laugh. We shared so many interests and had the same values and goals in life. I felt like I could truly be myself around him, and he accepted me for who I was, flaws and all. As our relationship grew, so did my love for him. I never knew I could care for someone so deeply. Every moment with him was special, whether we were out on a fancy date or just cuddled up on the couch watching movies. He made me feel loved and cherished in a way I had never experienced before. When William proposed to me, I was over the moon. It was the happiest day of my life. I couldn't wait to spend forever with him, building a life and a family together. I knew that with him by my side, I could take on anything life threw at us. We continued to make memories together, exploring new places, trying new things, and falling more in love with each passing day. We supported each other through the ups and downs of high school, celebrating each other's successes and comforting each other in times of need. But as the saying goes, all good things must come to an end. Our story took a turn that neither of us could have predicted, and now I find myself here, reminiscing about the days when life was simpler and love was all we needed. Looking back, I can't help but smile at how far we've come. From that first date to now, our love has only grown stronger. William is my rock, my best friend, and my soulmate. I'm so grateful to have him in my life, and I can't wait to see what the future holds for us. Our love story continued through college. We both attended the same university, studying hard during the week and enjoying each other's company on the weekends. We had plans, big plans. We talked about our future, about getting married, about starting a family. It all seemed so perfect, so certain. After college, we both landed jobs in our respective fields. William found success as a programmer, his skills in high demand in the tech industry. I found a job at a local company, nothing glamorous, but it paid the bills. We moved into a cozy little apartment, filled it with our dreams and aspirations, and settled into our new life together. Life was good. We were happy, or so I thought. Looking back now, I realized that maybe I was too caught up in my own world to see the cracks forming in our relationship. We still went on date nights, still said I love you every day, but something had changed. Maybe it was the monotony of everyday life, the routine that had crept into our marriage. Maybe it was my own insecurities, my fear of missing out on something more exciting, more passionate. As the years passed, our lives settled into a comfortable routine. We both had demanding jobs, and most of our days were spent working hard and trying to make ends meet. Our evenings were spent together, watching TV or just talking about our day. While I loved William dearly, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. I began to feel restless, craving excitement and adventure. Our life together had become predictable, and I longed for something more. I wanted to feel alive again, to experience the thrill of the unknown. I tried to shake off these feelings, telling myself that I was being selfish. After all, I had a loving husband, a stable job, and a comfortable life. But the longing persisted, growing stronger with each passing day. I started to withdraw from William, losing interest in our usual activities. I would often find myself lost in thought, daydreaming about a life less ordinary. I knew I had to do something to break free from the monotony, but I wasn't sure what. As the days passed, my thoughts became consumed with fantasies of what it would be like to cheat on William. I knew it was wrong, but the idea of something spontaneous and exciting was too tempting to resist. I even toyed with the idea of suggesting an open relationship, but deep down, I knew William would never agree to such a thing. I yearned for a taste of the forbidden, something to break up the monotony of our day-to-day life. The thought of being with someone else, even just for a moment, filled me with a sense of exhilaration I hadn't felt in years. I knew I was playing with fire, but I couldn't help myself. The thrill of the unknown called to me, whispering promises of excitement and passion. I tried to push these thoughts aside, to focus on my marriage and the life I had built with William. But the desire for something more lingered, growing stronger with each passing day. It was a challenging time in my marriage with William. There were moments when I felt tempted to cheat, moments of weakness where I sought validation or excitement outside of our relationship. I even went as far as installing a dating app and going on a few dates, but I never crossed the line into physical intimacy. Fear held me back, fear of getting caught, fear of hurting William, fear of losing everything we had built together. I remember the anxiety that consumed me, the constant worry that someone would recognize me, or that my actions would somehow find their way back to William. It was a dark period where I felt lost and unsure of myself. I sought solace in the anonymity of new clubs, where I could pretend to be single and flirt with strangers. But when things started to escalate, I always pulled back, paralyzed by fear. I realize now that these actions were a symptom of a deeper issue within myself. I was seeking something outside of our relationship to fill a void. Now I know deep down that nothing can replace what I had with William. As time went on, I found myself growing further and further apart from William. Despite his efforts to spice things up, to inject some excitement into our lives, I couldn't shake the feeling of boredom that had settled over me like a heavy fog. William tried his best. He really did. He planned spontaneous date nights, surprised me with thoughtful gifts, and even suggested we try new things in the bedroom. But no matter what he did, I still felt like something was missing. I knew he was trying to overcompensate, to make up for the fact that I was feeling restless and unsatisfied. But no matter how hard he tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that our life together had become dull and predictable. I really did feel guilty for feeling that way. William was a wonderful husband, kind, loving, and always there for me. But despite his efforts, then I couldn't help but feel like there was something missing in our relationship. As the weeks turned into months, my feelings of boredom and restlessness only grew stronger. I knew deep down that it was my fault. I should have talked to William about how I was feeling, maybe suggested we try therapy or something to spice things up. But I didn't. Instead, I let my feelings fester, allowing them to slowly poison our relationship. I became increasingly distant, lost in my own thoughts and fantasies of what life could be like if things were different. I knew I was being unfair to William. He didn't deserve to be treated this way. He was a good man, a loving husband, and he deserved better than what I was giving him. But I couldn't seem to help myself. I was trapped in a cycle of longing for something more, something exciting and new, while at the same time feeling guilty for wanting it. It was a vicious cycle that I didn't know how to break. Then one day, an opportunity presented itself that would change everything. My co-workers' best friends invited me out for a girls' night out, and I decided to go, hoping it would help lift my spirits. Little did I know that decision would lead me down a path I never could have imagined. I was always a social person, but I hadn't been particularly close to my co-workers until my two best friends, Emily and Jessica, started working at the same company. We had all been friends since college, and their presence at work added a new level of excitement to my days. Work, which had previously been just another mundane part of my routine, now became more enjoyable. As the weekend approached, Emily and Jessica suggested a girls' night out with our other close friends from college and high school. I eagerly agreed, feeling the need for a break from the monotony of my daily life. I hadn't gone out with my friends in a while, and the prospect of a fun night out lifted my spirits. I shared the plan with William, who understood my need for some time away and encouraged me to go and have a good time. When the weekend approached, I was thrilled at the prospect of a night out with my friends. It had been ages since we had done something together. I put more effort into my outfit than usual, wanting to feel special for the occasion. We started our evening with street food, enjoying each other's company and reminiscing about our high school days and about where everyone had ended up. Then we moved on to a local pub, where we indulged in drinks and laughter. As the night progressed, I noticed a man across the room who caught my eye. He was handsome, and there was something intriguing about him. We exchanged smiles, and I felt a rush of excitement. My friends encouraged me to approach him, even though I hesitated at first, knowing I was married. They dismissed my concerns, saying it was just a girls' night out, and that I deserved to have some fun. They also said that there were no rules on a girls' night out. Feeling strengthened by their support, I walked over to him. We struck up a conversation, and he introduced himself as Vincent. He was charming and easy to talk to, and soon we were laughing and enjoying each other's company. Vincent joined our group, and we continued to have a great time together. As the evening wore on and the drinks flowed, we all started getting bolder and bolder. I found myself drawn to Vincent, and we started making out, and in that moment, I felt a thrill I hadn't experienced in a long time. The idea of doing something spontaneous and exciting appealed to me, and I let myself get swept up in the moment. Vincent suggested we go back to his apartment, and without much hesitation, I agreed. My friend cheered me on and encouraged me and even said they would help cover me if needed. I should have known that was a lie. When I look back, I deeply regret the choices I made that night. Under the influence of alcohol, I let my guard down and ended up making a mistake that would change everything. I went back to Vincent's apartment, and in a moment of weakness, I cheated on my husband. We had sex, and for a while, I allowed myself to forget about everything else. We even watched a movie together, and in that moment, it felt like I was single again, with no responsibilities or worries. I was so caught up in the moment that I forgot to send a text to my husband, letting him know I wouldn't be coming home and that I would be staying with a friend. It was a selfish act, driven by the desire for excitement and spontaneity. but one that I would come to deeply regret. The next morning, reality hit me like a ton of bricks. I had done something terribly wrong. I had cheated on my husband. The guilt, disgust, and despair overwhelmed me. I gathered my things and left Vincent's apartment feeling ashamed and broken. As I made my way home, a wave of anxiety washed over me. How could I face my husband after what I had done? When I arrived home, my husband expressed surprise that I hadn't called or texted him the night before, as I had promised. I lied, telling him I had stayed with a friend because I was too drunk to drive. He seemed to buy my story and asked about my night. I lied again, saying it was great and that I had missed him and our friends. The guilt of lying to him weighed heavily on me, but I was too confused and scared to tell him the truth. I felt trapped, unsure whether to confess and risk losing him or keep quiet and hope it would all go away. In the end, I chose to bury the truth, hoping to move on and pretend it never happened. I tried to carry on with life as usual, but the guilt weighed heavily on me, especially when my husband was so loving and kind to me. Returning to work, I noticed my friends acting a bit strange, but I chalked it up to the embarrassing antics of the night before. With everything on my mind, I didn't dwell on it too much. However, as I reflected on my friends' behavior, I began to see red flags. What kind of friends would encourage me to cheat on my husband? I started to question their loyalty and the influence they had on me. The guilt and shame of my actions began to consume me, and I realized that living a lie was very hard. It felt like I was caught between a rock and a hard place. I didn't want to lie to my husband, but I also didn't want to lose him. So I tried to carry on with the guilt, hoping it would eventually fade away. I started being extremely kind to him, trying to overcompensate for my actions. However, it seemed like the more I tried, the more distant he became. No matter how much I tried to be close to him, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was slipping away. I no longer felt that thirst and hunger for spontaneity like I did before. It was as if my life had returned to normal, and the excitement I once craved had dissipated. My friends, who had been so close to me before, now seemed distant, as if they were keeping something from me. Even my husband, who I tried so hard to be close to, was distant. No matter how much I tried to shake things up, to inject some excitement back into my life, he only grew more and more distant. I found myself longing for the days when everything was new and exciting. I missed the thrill of trying something new, of stepping out of my comfort zone. But now, everything felt stale and repetitive. I tried to talk to my friends about it, to recapture some of that old magic, but they didn't seem interested. It was as if they had moved on, leaving me behind. My relationship with my husband suffered the most. We used to be so close, but now there was a distance between us that I couldn't seem to bridge. I tried to be more affectionate, more attentive, but it seemed like nothing I did could bring us back together. He was always busy with work or with his own thoughts, and I felt like I was losing him. I started to question everything. Had I made a mistake? Was I destined to live a life of mediocrity, always longing for something more but never quite reaching it? I knew I had to do something, but I didn't know what. My life had become a cycle of work, home, sleep, repeat, and I felt trapped in it. I missed my husband. I missed our close bond, but I couldn't figure out what was bothering him. I tried to bury the guilt, to pretend like it never happened, but the truth has a way of coming out. One night, a few weeks ago, my husband surprised me by making a reservation at a restaurant. He said he felt that things had been a little rigid between us lately, and that he thought going out would help us reconnect. I was excited because it had been a while since we had done something like that together. I had work that day, so I told him I would come back from work, and then we could go out for dinner. When I got to work that day, there were some red flags that I should have noticed, but I was too caught up in my routine to pay attention. My friends, who had been distant with me, approached me and started chatting during lunchtime. We talked for a while and they asked me about my husband. I told them he was fine and they seemed surprised. They asked me if we were still together, and I asked them what they meant by that. They said nothing and that they were just genuinely asking. I felt like that was a bit weird, but I didn't think much of it. Work finished up as usual. I clocked off and I went home. We got ready for dinner and then we went out. We got to the restaurant, ordered our food, and it was a little awkward between us at first. But we soon eased into conversation and started talking more freely. We talked about how we had been so busy these past few weeks, and how we had been distant with each other. We talked about a lot of stuff, and then at one point my husband asked me if I had anything to tell him. Looking back now, I realized that was his way of giving me a chance to come clean. But at that moment, I didn't have the courage. I hesitated, then told him no. I didn't have anything to tell him. He seemed okay with that, a little surprised and hurt perhaps, but we continued on with our dinner. We paid the check, left a generous tip, and then started heading home. However, when we got into the car to drive back home, my husband reached into a compartment in the car and brought out some papers. He handed them to me, and when I looked at them, I realized they were divorce papers. My heart sank and I felt a wave of emotions wash over me. I was horrified and my hands started trembling as I stared at the divorce papers in disbelief. Why was this happening? The only explanation that came to mind was the fact that I cheated. But how had he found out? As I looked at my husband, his once cheerful expression was now replaced by a mix of hurt and betrayal. I knew he had discovered my secret. He had found out about my infidelity, and he was crushed. He said he couldn't understand how I could betray him like that, how I could throw away everything we had built together. He explained that he had a video, and my heart sank as he played it on his phone. There, clear as day, was footage of me kissing the stranger from the bar. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. My friends had betrayed me. Those same friends who had seemed so supportive and curious about my night out had recorded my indiscretion and sent it to my husband. I then understood why they approached me during lunch. I couldn't comprehend their betrayal. Why would they do this to me? When had they even recorded me? I wasn't so drunk that night as to not be able to pay attention to my surroundings. So how had my friends been able to record me without me knowing? Had I been that distracted?
No.
My husband then, as I confirmed that they had sent it to him that very night, and he had been giving me a chance to confess. He said he waited and gave me time, but I just clamped up and never admitted it. He said he had decided to end our marriage. I felt numb, the weight of my actions crashing down on me. I had destroyed my marriage, hurt the person I loved most in the world, all for a fleeting moment of excitement. My husband said that he was angry, he was betrayed, but that one thing he was not was cruel. He told me that he would give me 10 minutes to get my things out of his house. He said that he had sent a message to my brother before we went out for dinner to come over and help me get my things, and that he had already sent over the video to my parents and siblings and explained everything. He said that my brother would most likely have already been waiting for us at the house, or would arrive in a matter of minutes by the time we would reach the house. It was as if it was all a joke. It was as if everything was just glossing over me. I didn't even know how to react. I cried and begged, but my husband wouldn't even bother listening to me. He just told me to be quiet and let him drive. When we got to the house, he told me that my 10 minutes started now. My brother hadn't arrived yet, so he said he would send a text to my brother to confirm where he was, and that in the meantime I could arrange my stuff and put them out on the porch. He was quite serious about this, and I knew there would be no talking to him now or trying to convince him to not kick me out. On checking my phone, I realized that my parents and even my siblings had all sent me messages ranging from "what the heck" to "I'm very disappointed in you." They were all horrified and disappointed. My parents told me to not even dare bug my husband and to just pack my stuff and come back to the house, that they would help me talk to my husband. That actually made me feel a little relieved. I packed and arranged my stuff on the porch, and in a matter of minutes, my brother was there. My husband didn't even bother coming out. He just shut the door in my face. I had to go back to my parents' house with my brother. Staying at my parents' house was challenging. They tried their best to be supportive, as did my siblings. Despite their anger at what I had done, they encouraged me to give my husband time to calm down, suggesting he might take me back since I had never cheated on him before. Commuting from my parents' house to work became my new routine because my husband hadn't allowed me to take the car when I left his house. He had bought the car, so I understood his decision. Additionally, he had cleared out our joint account, leaving me with practically nothing. While the money was his, this sudden lack of financial independence hit me hard, highlighting how much I depended on him. Unfortunately, bad news spreads faster than good news, and soon everyone at work knew that my husband had kicked me out of the house. It was during this time that I saw the true nature of my so-called friends. They were heartless, mocking my situation with indirect comments, making an already difficult time even more unbearable. About a week after moving back in with my parents, I decided to resign from my job. Before leaving, however, I reported the situation to the Human Resources Office, HRO. I didn't have high hopes that they could intervene, considering the whole thing happened outside of work hours and the comments my friends made were indirect ones, but I felt compelled to speak up before resigning. To my surprise, my boss was understanding of my situation. Instead of the usual 2-week notice, he allowed me to leave immediately. This gesture of empathy was a small comfort during this challenging time. Now, back at my parents' house without a job, I felt a deep sense of sadness and uncertainty. At times, I even feared sinking into depression. My husband had made sure I didn't forget to take the divorce papers, but I refused to sign them. My parents advised me to hold off, as there was a chance my husband might reconsider. Despite his silence, I held on to hope that we could work things out. Seeking a fresh start, I began searching for remote job opportunities. The idea of working from home appealed to me, as I was honestly tired of socializing after the whole betrayal shit my so-called friends pulled on me. If only I hadn't gone out with them that fateful night, perhaps none of this wouldn't have happened. During this time, my mother-in-law reached out to me. She was really disappointed in what I had done, but well, I was desperate, so I lied to her, saying I was drunk when that happened and wouldn't have cheated if I was sober. She seemed to kind of get it. She said she would help me talk to my husband, which gave me some hope. I thought maybe the pressure from my husband's mom and my parents might make him change his mind. A few weeks later, my parents decided it was time to intervene. My mother-in-law couldn't come, but she said she would message my husband and try to persuade him to forgive me. We went to my husband's house hoping to talk things out. He hadn't been communicating with any of us and had even blocked us, but we were banking on the fact that he was a programmer, and so he majorly worked from home. Thankfully, he was there, and he let us in. He offered us drinks, which seemed like a good sign, but he still didn't want to reconcile. My parents tried to talk to him about forgiveness and how what I did was wrong. He listened, but he made it clear that forgiving me wasn't something he was considering. He said even if he did forgive me, he could never forget what happened, and that it might be better for us to separate. He insisted that the best thing I could do was to sign the divorce papers to make things easier for both of us. He told me that no matter how I felt, cheating was inexcusable, and every action had consequences. I was devastated. I started crying, hoping my tears would move him, but he seemed unmoved. He expressed disappointment that I had involved his mom, saying it made him question his relationship with her. He also pointed out that I wasn't so drunk that I didn't know what I was doing, and he thought it was foolish of me not to notice my friends recording the incident. Before we left, he reiterated that signing the divorce papers would be the best thing for both of us to move on. It was a moment of clarity and like a wake-up call for me, a realization that hit me like a ton of bricks. I had to let William go. I had caused him immense pain, and there was no way to undo the damage I had done. The only path forward was to sign those divorce papers and accept the consequences of my actions. As I was about to leave with my parents, I mustered up the courage to apologize to William. I promised him that I would sign the papers and send them over. His surprise at my sudden change in attitude was palpable, but there was also a sense of relief in his demeanor. He thanked me, and as I walked away, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Returning home, I knew I had to come to terms with the reality of the situation. William was not going to take me back, and clinging to false hope would only prolong our pain. I explained to my parents that it was time to let him go, that dragging out the process would only be a waste of everyone's time. William had always been a caring and loving partner, but he could also be incredibly stubborn, especially when it came to matters of principle. I knew that once he had made up his mind, there was no changing it. So I made the decision to sign the divorce papers and deliver them to him myself. Standing on his doorstep, I felt a mix of emotions: regret, sadness, but also a strange sense of acceptance. I handed him the papers, thanked him for everything, and reiterated my apologies. There were no tears, no pleading. I knew it was over and I had to accept it. Now, I wait for the court date, knowing that my chances of a favorable outcome are slim. The video evidence of my infidelity is damning, and my brother, who is a lawyer, has told me that my case is not strong. My brother cannot represent me because conflict of interest, and well, he doesn't really specialize in divorce. But even so, I am grateful that William's terms in the divorce papers are not too harsh. I will not be left with nothing. At this point, all I can do is accept the consequences of my actions and move forward. I have learned a hard lesson, one that will stay with me for the rest of my life. I can only hope that one day, I will be able to forgive myself for the pain I have caused. And so here I am, pouring my heart out to strangers on the internet, hoping that maybe, just maybe, my story can serve as a cautionary tale. Don't take your loved ones for granted. Cherish every moment you have together because you never know when it might be taken away from you. Hello, my friends at Reddit. How are all of you doing? It's been a while since I have used this platform. I love listening to other people's stories and possibly giving some advice when anyone wants that. That's the reason why I've been so in love with this platform. I love this non-judgmental community. Today, I don't have any advice for anyone. Instead, I want to share my story with all of you. It's quite strange how life turns out. I used to read people's stories here and used to think, does that even happen in real life? Turns out it does happen, and I'm a prime example of that. Well, anyway, here's the tea, guys. I'm 26 years old and my name is Molly. I'm a married woman. My husband is the same age as me and goes by the name Trevor. I've known Trevor since we were in college together. We got married around 2 years back. We both were young and thought that we had found the love of our life. My husband owns a security company and the business pays pretty well. We were financially quite solid. Trevor told me that it's up to me whether I want to work or not. I told him that I cannot sit idle and need something to do. That's why I became a freelance writer. Our marriage has been pretty perfect, if I may say so myself, until I went and ruined it myself. Here's how it began. So when I went to college, I met my roommate, Christy. I was an introverted and shy girl, whereas Christy was the life of the party wherever she went. She was full of energy and always gained the crowd's attention in just mere minutes. Even though we had opposite personalities, we clicked instantly and became friends from the start of college. She never liked to leave me alone and took me to most of the events with her. It was because of her that I became social as well. I was still not a very outgoing person, but still it was an improvement from my previous self. I met Trevor at one such party. I was there with Christy, who introduced me to Trevor and Dan, her classmates. Truth to be told, I didn't even notice Trevor at first. My entire attention was focused on Dan. Dan was totally my type. You know, a little bit silent, tall, and handsome. We chatted for a while at that party, and I thought we had a genuine connection. We really understood each other, and we talked like we have known each other forever. That night when I was lying in bed, I thought of Dan, giddy with the thought that I finally found a romantic connection. I was pretty sure he was going to ask me out sooner rather than later. We had an insane chemistry at the party, and I was pretty sure he felt it too. I had multiple assignments that whole week, so I didn't accompany Christy anywhere. Unlike her, I actually needed the academic validation. It was finally Saturday when I got done with all the assignments and thought that I would finally meet Dan again. When I returned to the dorm, Christy was already getting ready for a party near our campus. She asked me which outfit is the best, and I helped her with that. She told me that she's really excited because her crush was coming to the party. I couldn't stop smiling because I was pretty sure that Dan was coming to the party as well. I told her mine too, and we both started laughing. We didn't discuss who our crush was and thought that we'll just introduce ourselves at the party. She helped me get ready in a really cute outfit. We both were all dressed up, and after clicking a few selfies, we made our way to the party. Christy told me that she's going to go find her crush and then bring him so I could meet him. She left, and then I kept looking for Dan. I was pretty sure that he would attend this party, but I still couldn't locate him anymore. After half an hour, Christy came back to me with her crush. I was really happy for my friend, but then I got the shock of my life when she came back with Dan. Dan was her crush. I had thought that we genuinely had a connection between us, but I was so wrong. It was clear that Christy's interest in him was reciprocated. He kept looking at her like she was the only girl in the room. She asked me where my guy was. I couldn't tell Christy that we both had a crush on the same guy. I was not that type of girl who would fight with her friend over a guy. So I just shrugged and told her that he hadn't come. She pouted but quickly let it go. Since Dan and I were already introduced, we didn't need that. We all talked for a bit, and then I excused myself and went to get a drink. It was then where I met Trevor. I had already let go Dan. We didn't have much going on anyways. We only met once. It was easier to forget about him. Trevor was kind and friendly to me. We talked a lot that night. I had a few drinks, so he also offered to drop me back to my dorm since Christy has already left with Dan. I felt like a fool for thinking that Dan was interested in me. He was just talking to me out of politeness because he was interested in my best friend. I didn't want to feel like a fool, so I just decided that it's best to forget about him and move on. Trevor was quite nice to me. When he dropped me at my dorm, I told him thank you and kissed him on the cheek. He asked for my number and we started texting after that. We texted quite a lot after that and soon got in a relationship after a few dates. While this was going on in my life, Christy and Dan also got serious with each other. Few times Christy suggested that we go on a double date, but I was just not interested. I didn't think that meeting Dan was a good idea, but Christy was quite adamant about it. We finally went to that double date. Even though I was happy with Trevor, I couldn't shake away the crush I felt for Dan. I still felt drawn to him. If he asked me something, I would get shy. I didn't like feeling that way. Who the hell has a crush on their best friend's boyfriend? I started avoiding Christy and Dan. Trevor didn't seem to mind it at all. Even though me and Christy were still friends, we weren't stuck to the hip then. Time passed by and we all graduated college. I'd forgotten about Dan and was happy in life with Trevor. We loved each other and he kept me happy. When he proposed to me to marry him, it was an instant yes. Life was going pretty well. Our marriage life was nothing but a bliss until it all fell apart. After college, both Christy and Dan had gotten a good corporate job. They got married soon after us. We even attended their wedding. The crush I had on Dan felt silly. I still found him good looking, but the crush felt so ancient I moved on from it. After college, everyone got busy in their life and we rarely met. But around a year ago, everything changed. Me and Trevor got into a huge ass fight. It wasn't like we didn't fight. We used to have our disagreements, but this fight was like nothing like the fights we used to have. So what really happened was that I felt that my husband was hiding something from me. His behavior had changed. He started coming home really late, and he started taking calls where I couldn't hear him. It was very different from his usual behavior. I felt it was really shady that my husband was hiding something from me. This continued on for weeks, but one day when I finally had enough of this, I confronted him and asked him what the hell was going on. He acted like I was overreacting and that there were no changes in his behavior. This annoyed me even more. I told him to cut the nonsense and be honest with me. He straight up denied everything and told me that I was making a fuss out of nothing. We kept screaming at each other. I told him that if he was cheating on me, he should tell me clearly. He got mad that I thought so low of him. When I asked him to see his phone, he kept on saying that he cannot give it to me. I was so sure that he was cheating on me. I even told him that he should leave me if he has to cheat on me. We both were really mad at each other. It was the biggest fight of our relationship. I couldn't stay in the same place as him, so I went out. I needed a drink, so I went to this bar. I just wanted to drink martini and swallow all my hurt and anger, but turned out the universe had plans for me. While I was having my drink in silence, I heard someone calling my name. This guy came to my side and just stood there. When I looked up at him, it was none other than Dan. Yeah, it was the same guy from college. He was surprised to see me there. He asked me what I'm doing at a bar so late at night. I told him that I just needed a drink. He asked where Trevor was. I told him we got in a fight. I was already a bit tipsy by then, so when he mentioned Trevor, I got a little emotional and had tears in my eyes. Dan didn't fail to notice that. He sat down by my side and started talking to me. He was trying to comfort me with random conversation and lame jokes, and I was grateful for that. I got more drunk while talking to him. We talked for a good time. I asked him what's going on with him. He told me that he had come to the bar with some client and was leaving when he saw me there. I asked him where Christy was. He told me that she is out of town for work and wouldn't be back to town for quite a few days. I listened to him talking and laughing, and it felt like my crush was coming to life again. He was just so gorgeous. I might have been a bit too drunk because I lost all my filters. We were talking about college parties when he mentioned that we also met at one such party. I told him I remember. I got a crush on him that day. He almost spilled his drink when I said that. I realized what I said, but it was too late to take it back. It took him a moment to process everything. He then shocked me even more when he told me that he had a crush on me too. He told me that he really liked me and was smitten by me at that party. I couldn't believe him. This guy liked me too. We could have been something. The next thing I know, I'm not in my seat anymore and we are kissing each other. I don't remember exactly who initiated it, but we were kissing passionately like it was one-in-a-lifetime kind of opportunity. Dan took me to his car and we hooked up there. It was like there was nothing in this world except us. I loved feeling that way. I used to think so much about him, and now I was finally with him. It seemed too good to be true. I'd forgotten everything at that moment. I didn't remember that I was married and someone's wife. After we were done with the deed, Dan asked me if I wanted to go to his house with him. I almost said yes, but then remembered that my husband was at home waiting for me. I told him that I needed to go home. He nodded in understanding and dropped me back home. I came home quite late at night and found Trevor to be sleeping in the bedroom. I was grateful that he was already asleep because I didn't know what I would have said to him if he was awake. I took a shower and went to sleep as well. I didn't want him to smell a man's cologne on me or something in the morning. I was still not really sober, so I just went to sleep. It wasn't until the morning when I woke up with a killing hangover that I realized what happened last night. I couldn't believe that I hooked up with someone else when I'm married. I felt like throwing up, especially when that someone else was my friend's husband. I was so mad at myself for doing what I did. But what was done, and there was no way I could undo it. All I could do was forget it and never remember it again. I got up from bed and went to the kitchen to get some water as I had a killer headache. Trevor was sitting at the stool when I entered the kitchen. He asked me where I was last night. He was still pissed about the fight we had the previous day. I just gave him a vague reply about needing fresh air. I didn't know if he bought my excuse or not, but he didn't push it, and I was so grateful for that. I was having a terrible headache already and couldn't deal with Trevor's questions. Later that day, I got a text from an unknown number. When I opened it, it was from Dan. He texted me telling me that he couldn't forget last night. It was not signed, but it was clear that it was Dan. Who else would text me that? Even though I couldn't forget that night as well, I didn't even want to think about it. I didn't want to destroy my house because of temptation. I decided to cut to the chase and texted Trevor that it was best we forget it and pretend that it never happened again. Dan texted me back that it was impossible for him to pretend that. He said he wanted more time with me. I kept telling him that it cannot happen again. He started calling me after that. Thankfully, Trevor was not at home that time. I picked up the call with the decision to tell him firmly to forget everything. But Dan had also thought the same thing. He started telling how life was giving us another chance to know what we could have been those years back. He said it was magic what happened between us, and we had to explore more of it now. I'm ashamed to admit that everything he said was so tempting that I was convinced. I told him that if we did this, then we had to make sure that this does not reach anyone. I didn't want our spouses to get to know this. Dan agreed immediately. He said he doesn't want Christy or Trevor to know this either. He said this will be just our secret. Dan told me that he will send me the location where we were going to meet the next day. The next day, after Trevor left for office. I got dressed and left for the location Trevor had sent me. It was a good location. It was on the very outskirts of the city. Noon came to this side, and I was so thankful for that. I parked my car next to Dan's truck. I then went to join him in his truck. He kissed me instantly, and soon we were making out. Making out with Dan was so fun. It was like the whole world used to blur out, and it was just us. And that's how my affair with Dan began. He used to find random locations where there were close to zero chances that anyone would see us. We didn't get any hotel room or anything because we didn't have any evidence of us being together anywhere. Christy came back to town after her work trip. Dan said that he was being careful and that no one will ever find out. He used to pick timings for us to meet when both Trevor and Christy were busy in their offices. I had thought that we will just continue to do this till we'll get this out of our system, and then just forget everything, but it was easier said than done. Every time I thought of putting an end to this, Dan would just say that he needs a bit more time, and then would give me a kiss, which made me feel like I needed more time too. We gave ourselves an ultimatum of 6 months. We had decided that we'll do all of this either in 6 months or even before that. Me and Trevor had started being distant with each other after that fight. Part of the reason was also that I used to feel guilty in front of him, but that fight had created a big distance between us. I suspected that it was another woman, but I was involved with another man as well, so I stopped prying at what he was doing. We just maintained our distance. It was so contrast to what we used to be earlier in our marriage. One day, Trevor told me that he was going out of town due to work reasons. This gave me another idea. I was tired of meeting Dan just in his truck. I needed more time with him and somewhere out of a vehicle. When I told him this, he didn't agree at first. He said there was a lot of risk, but after a bit of convincing, he agreed. After Trevor left in the morning, I told Dan to come over. I had switched off the security cameras placed outside our home. It was all clear. Dan came over soon after Christy left for work. I took Dan to the guest room. I was so happy to have him there. We hooked up and Dan left shortly after. Trevor was gone for 2 days, so the next morning I insisted to Dan that he comes over again. He was a bit hesitant of us getting caught, but still agreed. He came over and we went to the guest room. I was so lost at that moment that I didn't notice when the front door opened. Dan was on top of me when the door to the guest room opened and Trevor walked in on us. As soon as the door opened, we froze. Trevor wasn't supposed to come back home till the next day. I was so shocked to see him there. He was just as shocked, or maybe even more. Before I could say anything to him, he just slammed the door and went out. Dan quick rolled off me and I got dressed and ran after Trevor. He was not in the living room. I went outside to look for him, but his car was also not there. Dan came out as well. We both had ruined our home. We didn't say anything to each other and then he just left. He probably went to Christy to make sure Trevor doesn't reach her before him. I kept calling Trevor because I was scared that he doesn't do anything rash. He had always had a temper, and I didn't want him to do something irrational. He never picked up my call. Dan called me later to tell me that Trevor had called Christy and now she was furious at him. He said that we cannot talk again, and I just hung up on him, already knowing what he said. I kept waiting for Trevor to come back home, but he didn't. The entire day passed like that. I even called his friends and in his office, but no one knew where he was. I fell asleep on the couch only while I was waiting. It was around midnight that Trevor finally got back home. He was mad as hell. When I tried to go near him, he just pushed me away. I tried to say something, but he told me to keep my mouth shut. He said he had seen enough and there's nothing I could say to him which would make it okay. To be honest, I understood his anger. It was very well justified, but I still didn't want it to end our marriage. I know it was very selfish of me, but I just couldn't watch my house get destroyed just like that. I kept telling Trevor how it was just a temptation and meant nothing else. I tried to reason with him how it was just physical. There were no emotions involved. It was the wrong thing to say because when I said it, he got even more upset. He threw away the vase kept on the table and told me to get out of his house by the next morning. I told him that he cannot kick me out of the house. We had built the house together. I had designed everything by myself. We had so many memories here, but he just laughed and said that if I didn't, I'll have to face the consequences in a much worse way. He said that and stormed to the bedroom. I sat in the living room with my head in my hands. The reality that I had ruined my life finally sunk in. I ruined my beautiful marriage just because of a meaningless affair. I thought that I deserved one more chance. One small mistake cannot end all those years I had spent with Trevor. I thought that his anger might cool down a bit in the night, and then I can try to convince him in the morning about me giving me one more chance. I decided that I was going to give all my efforts if Trevor decided to give me one more chance. I decided to not leave the house like he had asked and instead to stay and try to talk to him. The next morning, when Trevor woke up and found me downstairs, he got pissed. Like really, really pissed. He asked in a very harsh tone what I was still doing here. I told him we needed to talk, but he just said that I should have talked to him before going to bed with another man. I told him to listen to me just one time, but he was not interested. He was just screaming how I betrayed him, and that too with his friend. He even abused Dan and said how we both were disgusting human beings. He asked me how I could do that to him. I had no answer for his question, so I just stood there with my head down. He looked at me with so much hatred in his eyes and told me how he came home earlier because he wanted to spend some quality time with me, but never knew that I was such a horrible person. Yet, he told me to leave his place as soon as possible and to never show him my face again. He himself brought my suitcase and asked me to get out of there. I was ashamed and embarrassed that I was being thrown off like that. I was humiliated enough and decided it was best if I left then. I thought that maybe staying time apart will give him some perspective and he'll forgive me. I left the house and went to stay at my sister's place in the same town. She was really mad at me that I cheated on my husband, but because she was my only sibling, she had to come to my rescue. I decided that I'll stay at her place for a few days, and then maybe I'll go back and live with Trevor or find something else of my own. I kept texting Trevor, hoping for a reply or something, but I didn't hear even a peep from him. He used to see my texts but never respond. A few days passed like this and I was already a mess. I missed Trevor. My mind kept going back to the time when we were together and happy. It seemed like such a long time ago. I was genuinely regretting what I had done. I thought I was in my lowest phase of my life. I had lost my husband and my home. I didn't think anything much worse could have happened, but I was turned wrong. It had been 2 weeks since I went to a coffee shop to get a coffee. I was sitting in the coffee shop when a strange man came and sat in front of me. I was quite shocked as to what was happening when he called me by my name and said hello. He gave me a smile which really creeped me out. I asked him how he knew me. He didn't reply to my question. He told me that he is from a bank. I had never heard of that bank. Yeah. He said they have been trying to contact me for a week, but I never gave them any reply. I didn't understand why these people wanted to contact me. I didn't have a bank account in their name. I asked him what he wanted to talk about. He brought out an envelope and told me that he wanted to give this to me. He said they went to my mentioned address, but they were told I don't live there anymore. I was still confused as to what the hell this guy was talking about. I opened the envelope and found a credit card bill in my name. It listed so many expenses that I got a whiplash. The total amount was $50,000. I told this guy that it was a mistake, and they must be looking for someone else because it cannot be me. I told him that I didn't have a bank account in their bank. He looked at me like I was kidding. He said he was not mistaken and showed me my bank details. There was an account in my name with all my IDs. IDs I didn't bring with me and were still at home with Trevor. The bank guy continued telling me that they would have emailed me or texted me a message, but the email address was not in use anymore, and the phone number given wasn't in service anymore either. I was baffled with everything that was happening. How can I get a debt of $50,000 without even spending anything? I told him that I'll get back to him. He told me that I had a month to pay the entire amount. He just wanted to deliver the bill in person. I knew I wanted answers, and the only person who could give them to me was Trevor. I called a cab and went to the house. Trevor was not there, and the main gate was locked up. I had to find him somehow, so I went to his office, but he wasn't even there. I asked everyone where he was, but no one really knew. I kept calling Trevor, but he didn't pick up. It was almost evening, so I went back to my sister's place. I took out my laptop and researched more about the bank. Turns out it was one of those banks where you can easily open an account with basic documents. I went through their policies and saw that they were very strict with their policies about debt, just like most banks. They didn't even have that installment system. It meant that I had to deposit the entire amount in just one go, and that too in just 1 month. Trevor had to explain this to me. I kept calling him and leaving texts, but I got nothing but silence. I decided to go to the house the next day, and in the early morning before Trevor goes anywhere. I didn't have this much amount with me. How the hell was I supposed to pay this amount? The next morning I left for home and Trevor was in the house only. I asked him what the hell was going on. He asked me why I came back here. I told him to first tell me why there was a debt of $50,000 on my name, and that too from a bank whose name I had never heard of. When he heard this, he finally smiled like he had gotten something he wanted. He said that it took them quite long to figure out my location. I looked at him with confusion. He just shrugged and started telling me that I should be more careful. Identity theft is getting quite serious these days. I told him to not feed me that nonsense. All my IDs and documents were kept here only. How could someone use them to open a bank account in my name? He smiled and said that maybe I gave it to them. I was shocked to hear this. My husband had given my identity to criminals. I asked him why he would do that and why did he even know people like that. He said that I was forgetting that owns a security company, which meant that he knew all kinds of people. He asked me if I remembered when I was doubting him and thinking that he was having an affair because he was always on his phone or in his office. It was because he was tracking these group of cyber criminals who were stealing people's IDs and committing financial frauds with them. I was still processing everything when Trevor continued telling me that when he saw me with Dan, he knew he wanted to see me suffer, and that's when he contacted them and gave them all my IDs. I asked him what he would get out of this. Why was he being like this? He got angry as he remembered something and then said that I betrayed him and broke his trust. He said I deserved it for hurting him like that. He kept telling me how he wanted to build a complete life of luxuries for me, but I gave up everything for just a meaningless affair. The anger and hurt in his voice were so evident that I couldn't stop crying. He told me that I should not waste my crocodile tears. It does nothing to him. He told me that I should get out and never try to contact him again. I was just leaving the house when he told me that I should keep checking my bank account statements. I thought that was a very specific and weird thing to say. As soon as I left the house, I opened my phone and checked the balance of my personal account. This was my personal account, and all the money from my freelancing work was credited to this account. I didn't have a habit of checking my bank balance regularly, but I still knew that there should be a decent amount in this account. Imagine my horror when I found out that my bank account was in the negative. I checked the transactions and saw that someone had withdrawn all the money from the account using my credentials. I was so hurt and pissed that I started crying right there. I didn't think anything worse could happen when Trevor threw me from the house, but this was nothing I could have thought of. In the span of a few days, I had lost my husband, became homeless, and now I was broke with a debt of $50,000. I couldn't stop crying. I had no effing clue what I was going to do. I somehow controlled myself and went back to my sister's place. She got worried when she saw me with puffy eyes. I told her everything. She told me that we could file a complaint, but I told her it wasn't going to do us any good. These are really sharp cyber criminals. They covered their tracks well, and there was nothing that we could do now. She calmed me down and told me that we'll figure something out. I just kept crying in her arms. Few days passed like this. After that day when Trevor caught us, I had not heard a word from Dan or Christy. I wouldn't have called him, but I was desperate for help and thought that maybe I could get a loan from him. When I called him, he picked up, but his tone was completely different from what it used to be with me. He asked me quite harshly why I had called him. I was quite taken aback with his tone, but still told him that I needed his help. He said that he cannot do anything. He had finally convinced to give him another chance. She had forgiven him, but if she found out that he talked with me, she was going to lose her mind. She told me that I should not call him again, or he will block me. The guy who convinced me to have an affair with me was telling me that he was going to block my number. I was officially at rock bottom. There was no one who was going to help me. I decided to get whatever work I could get to take it. If everything was already not enough, Trevor also sent me divorce papers. His lawyer said I could contact my lawyer, but I didn't have any money to afford a lawyer and then seek alimony. I didn't have the energy for that, so I just signed wherever they asked. They said that they'll contact me as and when required. So yeah, that's it, guys. That's the summary of everything that had happened in the past days. From having a sweet and a perfect wedding life, I got to this homeless and broke life. Karma is really real. It got me back from my affair with Dan. Even though I'm really hurt with what Trevor had done with me, I couldn't fault him. When he loved me with everything. So how could I expect him to take his revenge half-heartedly? He wasn't that type of guy to do things half-heartedly. Currently, I'm working non-stop at writing for small companies. It's nearly not enough for what I need right now, but it's still better than nothing. I'm still crashing at my sister's place. It was a good thing that she lived alone. Otherwise, I didn't know what I was going to do. Currently, I have no idea what is going to happen, so I'm just figuring out one day at a time. Thank you guys for listening to my story. If you have any comments or suggestions, please leave them here.